here. Let's go to Javi, and he says, Ohtani, future 3-time MVP?
Big time player, and he's just hitting home runs. And every one of the Dodger batting order, at least 1 through 5, are having phenomenal seasons. And now the cavalry has come. Here comes Walker Buehler, and I hope it works out for him because he is such a fierce competitor. But Dodgers have just an unbelievable lineup. Now, the back end of the lineup, from Gavin Lux to Chris Taylor, there's a whole bunch of guys at the bottom are not hitting, and something's going to have to change down there. But boy, the Dodgers, top of that batting order, phenomenal. The Padres are going to see the Dodgers pretty quickly after the series at Wrigley Field is over.
Well, talking about Ohtani, do you think this whole gambling controversy has now been swept under the rug and it's now in our rearview mirror, or is this going to become an issue in the near future?
I don't think it's an issue for him. It's obviously an issue for his interpreter, his personal aide, and that end of the story, has not been finalized. We keep gathering more information that this money was funneled through Pechanga Casino and Resorts World in Las Vegas, and that's how the money was delivered by his personal aide. But that court case will be separated from baseball. I think he's clear and free, except you didn't pay attention to your own personal finances.
And then, by the way, did you notice that Jurickson Profar is still hitting better than Will Smith, who Will Smith called Profar irrelevant?
Yeah, Will Smith, though, is hitting 300.
Yeah, he is. He's a good player.
Yeah. Sidebar note, I don't know if I mentioned this at the top. The Padres put in Joe Musgrove back on the disabled list.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big issue. And for the first time, I've never heard this before, this came from Musgrove. He used the word bone spur. Now, they're saying tricep tendonitis, top of the elbow. But in the course of the conversation, Joe says, it's bothered me between starts, and somehow the word bone spur got involved in this conversation. If he's got anything resembling a bone spur here, that's not going to be solved in 15 days on the DL. So we'll have to watch this late developing story for Joe Musgrove. Next question.
Well, let's just say this. It would be a good excuse if he ever got called in the military draft.
Oh, okay.
We know someone else who's done that. Okay, let's go to Gary. He says the Padres lineup is good, but they don't have enough starting pitching to compete with the Dodgers.
Well, if they don't have Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove, vintage Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove, then the Padres have got a real problem. But Darvish has come back, has had back-to-back really strong outings after the minor neck issue. And we'll see. Musgrove is going to spend all 15 days on the DL. Maybe that will calm this whole thing down. Joe's ERA is like 6.79. It's still really high. He's had 4 really good outings and 4 really bad outings. So, can you baby this through the rest of the season? It's like 135 more games to be played. That becomes an issue because I don't think they got any pitching at AAA and the next pitching's at AA, and Rob Snelling might be getting a phone call, but the question is he ready? The wild card might be Adrian Morejon. They've worked really hard with his mechanics, his release points, his body location. He's pitched pretty well in short-term bullpen sessions. Maybe he becomes the emergency starter if they have any more physical woes.
Well, it seems like they brought up Vasquez to slot into Musgrove's spot.
That did not work out well.
No, it hasn't. But he has potential. You can see it. Brito has done well. Matt Waldron was awful on Sunday's game. I don't know if he sticks around as the number 5.
Well, I think he has to be the number 5. That might be just an odd thing. He could not control the knuckleball yesterday in Phoenix, but prior to that, he was dancing around. His ERA was under 3 for a stretch of time. So I'm not ready to give up on Waldron because they need Waldron somehow. But they're going to need another starter now with this Musgrove thing. I don't think Vasquez is the guy. I'm not sure that Brito's the guy, and maybe Morejon is the one that they call out of the bullpen and give me 4 innings and see. But the problem is that becomes in a bullpen day. And if you have a bullpen day in the middle of your rotation and you're playing 9 games in a row, you got a problem. Then what do you do with the day after and the second day after if you burn your bullpen? So that's a big, big issue. On we go. Next question.
On we go. Let's go here to Richard. He says, question, should MLB have someone natural from the commissioner's office to be in charge of the revenue sharing money to ensure it gets invested back into the club?
Well, this has got to come from the union. Somehow, in, of course, a collective bargaining agreement. And this spins back to a topic John and I have discussed at great length. They don't want a salary cap. What we do need is a floor to spending. And the floor to spending for you baseball fans is that everybody takes revenue share, has to spend a minimum amount because they took revenue share. We can't have the Oakland A's putting a $43 million team on the field, or Tampa Bay having a $63 million payroll, or Pittsburgh $89 million. If you're taking revenue share, You negotiate a fee, which is the bottom amount you have to spend. It might be 120 million. And everybody has to spend 120. And if the Yankees and Dodgers want to spend 290, which they are right now, that's fine. But the Florida spending makes more money available in Kansas City, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Oakland, Tampa. It makes more money available for veteran guys to sign free agent contracts and go there. And on a 1 or a 2 year deal, a veteran guy can help make the Oakland A's a more competitive team, or this mess in Miami, instead of having the Marlins walking around with a payroll of $59 million. But that has to come from the union through collective bargaining. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, because the MLB commissioner is not going to do this on his own.
No, he can't.
Well, yeah, and the owners certainly don't want it, or maybe they do. Do you think the MLB owners, do they think of John Fisher as like a parasite?
Nobody says anything about John Fisher. They should.
They should, yeah. Well, he's one of their guys. Maybe they're trying to protect him.
But the union should, and probably will. But anything in union and collective bargaining talks is a trade-off. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if the union says we're going to accept the Florida spending, no, we're not accepting election or a salary cap at the top, but maybe we'll accept your proposal for Florida spending. But what are you going to give us? You got to give me something if I'm going to give you this. Yeah. That's what the CBA is always about. The biggest brouhaha with Tony Clark and the union is the rule changes. They don't have any say in how the rules are being changed. They fought, tooth and nail, dagger and knife over the pitch clock. Well, then maybe baseball says, we'll allow you to have input and be on the committee for rule changes. Give us the Florida spending. So that's the way these things get done, but it's complex.
Well, if you were king and you could make all the decisions, what are the things that you would do as commissioner of Major League Baseball?
Florida spending, item 1. Mm-hmm. Second item, go meet with the NFL and find out how they financially structure their G3 fund, which allows the league and the team owner to put money into the pot with city, county, and state money to renovate stadiums or to build stadiums. That's why the NFL has been so successful. Infrastructure, the G3 fund, that's what it's called. Baseball should be doing some of that. It would have solved the freaking mess in Oakland, the quagmire of mess in Tampa with the owner and the two cities, Tampa, St. Pete. You gotta help make the program stronger. If I were a commissioner, if I were a king, those are two things that I'd work with.
Well, if they did that, I think the Expos would still be in Montreal, right?
Exactly. If Quebec had the money, because again, we're not giving you the money. We're giving you a share of the money. The owner's putting a share of the money. City, county, state, or in Montreal's case, province, you put that money into the pot. That's how you get stadiums built. That's what the NFL's done. Look at the NFL, their blueprint. I mean, it is real. It's a consortium. It's got some partnership parts to it. Next question.
Okay, next question. Okay, let's go here to social media. We got a lot of good questions and comments here. Let's talk about the Kentucky Derby. This is from Ann. She says, thank you, Churchill Downs. Relieved Bob Baffert is out of the Kentucky Derby and ought to be banned for life. Horse racing will move on without him, whether or not he is contrite. Irrelevant. He drugs his horses, whether or not it's traceable the day of the race. Bottom line, he is a cheat of the worst kind. My father owned racehorses and never, ever were horses treated the way Baffert treats his, abominably.
Well, it's not just him. It has been an issue. There have been a lot of suspensions of trainers probably in the last 5 to 7 years. The fatality rate has been extreme in horse racing, as witnessed by last year's Kentucky Derby week. 12 horses died on the track. We don't have a solution. I happen to think it's got to do with the layout of the track, synthetic surface versus dirt sand surface. Does it hold water, etc.? The running conditions for these horses. It's tragic. If you've ever, I was at Del Mar and I saw horses go down at Del Mar and they had to bring out the van and bring out the curtain and euthanize them right on the track. It's a horrible thing. And these are tremendous animals and the cost to raise them and train them is phenomenal. And there's a relationship between a Baffert and the horse and a Baffert and the owner and a Baffert and the jockey. And when you lose one of them on the track in a race, it's a terrible, traumatic thing to just have to watch. I'm not saying that Baffert is clean. I'm not going to say that he's ever cheated the way that she's alleged he's cheated, but it's gone on a lot. to me, the health of the horse is now equally important. But they've got all these drug testing things that are in place, and they now have these observers and these statistical charts that they keep as to how the horses train between big races, how their physical exams and their blood work goes, because they're tested all the time. If things pop up, injuries, whatever, how they're cared for, when they're allowed back on the track. So in the last couple of years, by virtue of the trauma that we've seen everywhere, from Santa Anita to what we had a bad stretch at Del Mar, and obviously we had 12 horses die at Saratoga in the last calendar year. Saratoga is one of the great tracks, plus what happened at Churchill Downs. So there's a lot of methodology that's now being used. Everybody's pouring resources in to try to find a way to help and keep these horses healthy.
Yeah, two quick comments. I remember, number one, you said some time ago that they should consider spreading out the Triple Crown races to have more time between for the horses to recover. I mean, what the time gap is now? Just a few weeks,
Well,
right?
it's 2 weeks between the Derby, Preakness, and then there's a 3-week layoff before they go to Belmont. Now, there had been dialogue. We've talked about it here on our podcast. Last year, there was a lot of dialogue right in the midst of all the horse breakdowns, that let's just do it on holidays. Let's run the Derby. If you want to run it May 5th, fine, or maybe Memorial Day. Run the Derby May 5th. Run Preakness Pimlico July 4th week, and then run Belmont Stakes Labor Day weekend.
Hey,
You have 3 marquee events on holidays, and all the focus of the attention. Now you're going head to head against the Indy 500. That's a big issue. And Labor Day weekend is the start of college football, and here comes the NFL. That's a challenge too. But if you put equal amounts of time between race 1, race 2, race 3 of the Triple Crown, the recovery time for the horses works. Then you get great fields rather than having 8 show up at Pimlico because a bunch got hurt or don't want to run coming out of Kentucky Derby.
yeah,
If I were king, I'd solve that problem too.
that's a good idea. Well, but actually, the major tennis tournaments Wimbledon is around the 4th of July usually, and I think US Open is around Labor Day weekend. But the other question I had is, how do they transport the horses to all these races? Do they fly them, or do they put them in a trailer?
I think they put them in vans,
Really?
massive luxury vans.
But that's still got to be really tough on the horse, especially if there's 2 weeks between our races. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating what goes on there.
Yep. So that's what I would do. The health of the horse to me is as critical as the sport itself.
Okay, let's move on. Let's go to here, talk about Coach Prime. Boy, people love talking about this. And this is from XC, and he says, this is a ridiculous attempt to politically assassinate Deion Sanders because he is a threat to the college football good old boy booster establishment. People are more up in arms about Deion than they were about what happened at Penn State. Why? Now, that's a question worth pondering.
Well, what happened at Penn State was secretive stuff involving Jerry Sandusky, whose life is gone in prison. Joe Paterno didn't pay attention. Did Joe Paterno take part? No. He just didn't pay attention to what was going on his staff, and nobody else did too, and that was tragic. And of course, Joe Paterno promptly died from lung cancer, months after Sandusky got sentenced to prison. So this is different. This is Deion and attitude. It was a fascinating piece that the New York Times and The Athletic wrote about last week about the 87 players who have been run off. Just think about that. 87 players dispatched by a coaching staff in a 14-month period. It's a big, big issue. And it's offended a lot of other people. Now, you can come back and yell, well, everybody's in the transfer portal now. Yeah, well, they have to get in the transfer portal because of player free agency. But they're not running off volumes of players. San Diego State, closer to home, they've had 47 players leave the program. But I'll swear to you, Sean Lewis isn't running 47 players off. Sean Lewis tried to keep those guys, and these guys are transferred out and haven't been signed anywhere. But Deion and the stuff that those players who were removed from the program, the way it was presented to them and how they were treated, that's pretty shabby. And I tell you that the Board of Regents at the University of Colorado has taken a lot of heat about you allowed this to happen on your watch. Nobody's responded from the president down to the Board of Regents. And we'll see. Deion had great success at Jackson State by importing kids who could dominate at that level. Now, this is a different level. And he got his comeuppance last year. And I swear to you, some of the Pac-12 blowouts, those opposing coaches who did not like the way Deion treated his players when he got there, they ran up scores. And there's a bunch of people in the Big 12, I bet this year, are going to run up scores on Deion too. So is Deion a good coach at this level? That's open to debate. What's not debatable is I thought it was unethical how he treated all those players. To lock those players out of the football facility after the meeting when he told them, transfer portal, go, or to lock them out of their dorms. That's a pretty crappy way to treat players. At least that's what I think. John Riley says.
Lock them out of their dorms?
Yep.
Really? I mean, I understand locking them out of the facility, especially now where they're all done by key codes and that someone just updates the computer. Now, some of the fans in social media have said, this happens in basketball all the time. You get a new coach, he clears out the roster, blows everyone out, and starts over. Why is this different? Is it because it's football?
87. Different than 4 starters or 4 players in basketball.
But basketball will clear out 12 guys. I mean, essentially their whole roster.
I don't know if they clear out everybody, but they cleared out everybody at Colorado. It's 87 guys.
But they only won 1 game. So,
coach them up.
Well, yeah, well, you can only coach some players so much before you hit the wall.
Oh, John is so liberal about everything. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay,
next question.
Moving on. Okay, let's talk here about all right, Julio Urias and the Dodgers and Trevor Bauer. And this is from Chuck. He says, Julio and Manfred have no beef with each other. He'll sign right away. But Bauer, fook any of that noise. Manfred has a vendetta against Trevor, as does yours truly, Lee Hacksaw Hamilton.
I don't have a vendetta against Bauer. Bauer's paid a price. But, when in the modern day theory of athletics, being stupid keeps you out of the game. I come from an NFL background. You know how many players that I've crossed paths with that had problems socially and are back in the NFL after serving whatever sentence they had to serve? Bauer served his sentence. He's still stupid as far as I'm concerned for his decisions, but shouldn't be out of baseball, should be allowed back, but he's kind of toxic. Maybe he gets signed once he continues to dominate down in Mexico. And in terms of Julio, he's going to get another suspension because he's a second-time offender in domestic abuse. And history has shown that guys who are repeat offenders, whether it's alcohol or steroids, etc., they get double what they got the first time. So he got 20 games suspended a couple of years ago, and then he became a great pitcher and Cy Young Award type guy. And then he had this last season where it was interrupted when he got arrested or charged again, and he's plea bargained out. I assume he's going to get 40. So that'd be 40 games. Now, whether that 40 games is already ticked off the clock because we're more than 40 games into the season, that remains to be seen. But there will be another discipline for him. But he's still a great, great talent. And I assume Julio will get signed by somebody else. I don't know if the Dodgers will touch him. But if they don't, the team that needs pitching should make a run at both Bauer and Julio. And that's the Angels.
The Angels for sure could use both of these guys. But which of the two do you think signs first?
It just depends how they structure whatever this 40-game discipline is against Julio. He is going to get a second set of suspension. Now, whether it's suspension already served because he's been out of baseball as they've negotiated this plea bargain, that remains to be seen. I assume it'll be 40, and if they post-date it and say, well, the season's 52 games already. And remember, he's not going to be ready to pitch. He's going to have to go to extended spring training. It could be at least a month if he gets signed before he joins the team, because he's got to go through all the regimen of getting his arm actually ready for Major League Baseball max efforts. So, but I do think he'll get disciplined first. Whether he gets reinstated because he's, quote, already served the discipline remains to be seen.
Hey, man, imagine if Urias gets signed first. Bauer is just going to be livid. The social media would be great. Hey, let's get a Raider comment in here. Love talking Raiders with Hacksaw. This is from the original Surfer Bob. His burning question: what? Will the players get more pay if there's an 18th game? That's not a question. Certainly not a burning one. Of course they will. They should play 18. No preseason. Teams can do more on those joint practices. That's enough to get ready. By the way, dude, we in the nation love your appearances with JT the Brick on Raiders Nation Radio.
Well, I do a lot. I do a lot on Mad Dog Radio. I do NFL Notebook stuff there. I also do it for a station up in Las Vegas with JT, who was a longtime listener of Jim Rome way back in the day when they used to have the what was the Rome things?
It was a smack off.
Smack off, yeah. JT one of the first smack offs and got himself a job in small market radio and moved up. And He's up in Vegas and does a Monday, Tuesday show, I believe it is, on Sirius XM. So he calls me every once in a while. We do NFL Notebook stuff. Raiders, the Raiders, I thought, had a good draft, kind of a unique draft. They didn't solve the quarterback issue, but they filled some other holes. And since then, they signed Michael Gallup, who's a big play receiver from the Dallas Cowboys. And this morning, they just signed ex-Charger Jalen Guyton, who's another big play receiver. And they drafted the tight end Brock Bowers. They got Devontae Adams. They got the receiver from New England, Jacoby Myers. They've got a whole collection of guys. Now, I don't know if they have a running back that's anywhere near equal to what Josh Jacobs was, but they're putting some things in place for the gunslinger Gardner Minshew to throw the ball too. So it'll be fascinating to see. But I like Gallup. I mean, he averaged 15 yards per catch. 2 years ago, had a great season, had a knee injury. Took him half a year to get back. Didn't get used a lot at the end by the Cowboys. He's going to be an integral part. So if you take Gallup, Guyton, who's averaged 15 yards per catch as a part-timer with the Chargers, and then you throw that in with Brock Bowers, and you still got Devontae Adams, and you get Jacoby Myers, who I think is really underrated. That's a lot of firepower. So Raider Nation, I might not wear your gear, but I do respect your general manager and your coach.
Well, has the Raiders already announced Minshew as the starter? Because I think that's debatable.
They're going to compete, but I got to believe because he's more dynamic. He does throw touchdowns, but dude does throw interceptions. But I think he's the starter coming out of the gate.
Okay. You want to squeeze another one in
Let's
here?
do one more here before we wrap it up.
All right. Let's go here to Reggie Bush, which is always a good comment. This is from Rutherford. He says, I hate USC athletics. Only because I'm jealous UCLA athletic fan. I cheered the USC punishment. Then teams in the SEC got caught with similar penalties, but the committee compromised with most of the SEC members and ignored their issues. So yes, USC through Eastern bias was screwed.
Well, there's lots of ways to look at this from the USC scenario. I thought the penalties were unbelievably harsh because the penalties were committed by Reggie Bush and his family, not by Pete Carroll. Now, did coaches have knowledge of what was going on? Well, the running backs coach there who lost his job might have. Pete Carroll was never, ever mentioned at all. But they took 30 scholarships away. And that's an unbelievable amount of talent that you don't have access to, plus the probation. So I thought they were unbelievably harsh at USC. In terms of the Southeastern Conference, yeah, there's a lot of people have done a lot of things with big money there, but there have been sanctions. And, Florida was in trouble and Florida State got in trouble. And, some of the Ole Miss was in trouble. So there have been severe sanctions handed out there. We've never gotten back to what happened in the 80s with SMU and the Pony Express with Eric Dickerson and Craig James and the Boosters. They folded that program. Nobody's ever been folded since SMU. The threat was always out there. But the fact that SMU was a multiple times offenders back in the day, that's the difference now. But now we have NIL. Now we have the transfer portal. Now it's the Wild West. That's going to change within a year from today when we're doing this podcast. I think a lot of the rules of the infrastructure of how those things work will have changed. And of course, the common joke was SEC. You know what that stands for? Sure, everybody cheats.
Well, what happened with Cam Newton? I remember he got in trouble.
Autographs and money, or autographs and services, and nothing really. I don't recall that Auburn got in big heat for that, but that was kind of an isolated thing. He was selling autographs. Same thing happened at Ohio State. Jim Tressel lost his job. He's a really good coach, and he was a friend of mine. He lost his job because there were players who were doing tattoos and selling memorabilia and equipment and getting money under the table. And Ohio State got tagged. Michigan just got hit. Harbaugh is going to get sanctioned by the NCAA. He may be the coach of the Chargers, but Jim Harbaugh is going to get sanctions for the COVID violations that just occurred in 2020. And of course, Arizona State just got nailed. The Herman Edwards thing, when all those coaches got taken out, Arizona State has got a probation they got to serve by virtue of what happened, illegal contacts and recruiting at Arizona State during the COVID blackout period. So some guys bend the rules, and a whole pile of guys have gotten caught, and some guys paying a price.
Well, this still strikes me as a contradiction because they're making so much money. with ticket sales and TV revenue, and yet they're preventing kids from making what really is their fair share. I mean, they're the stars. They're the people that the fans come out to see. To me, strikes me as just a really bad way of handling it. I would love to see this wild, wild west of the NIL become even wilder, so the players can get what they deserve.
Well, the players are being compensated. They had to go through court, and the courts ruled you have a right to compensation. And then with additional litigation, they came up with the idea of the NIL collective, which raises money. The money then goes to the program. The program distributes it. If everybody gets the same amount, or the quarterback gets this and the star player gets that, schools all handle it real differently. But to me, it's a turnoff. But the players have to be taken care of. I concur with you there. The flip side, and you've totally ignored it. I mean, if I open up a segment of Fans Forum for strictly input from people who like Olympic sports or women's sports, because the amount of money that your school is dragging in has to fund 18 to 21 other athletic sports.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that involves scholarships and that travel and health insurance and all that for the women's soccer team, the men's golf team, lacrosse, the Olympic sports. A lot of people lose sight that this is just not a football, basketball thing, but all that big money, when they back that Brinks truck up and unload it, a lot of that money's got to go to support these other programs. Penn State has, I think, 21 or 24 varsity sports, and that's all for the most part fueled by Penn State Nittany Lion football.
Wow.
So it's just not to the football and basketball players. It's everybody.
I would imagine at some universities, the football program on its own is a net loss, right? For some, because their expenses have got to be huge.
Yeah.
And so at some point, you can't just depend on football to fund all these other sports. The other sports have to be legit quality to attract fans, just like women's basketball has been doing. We need more of that.
We're getting more of that. And Title IX's had a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
The end result of Title IX 20 years ago was Caitlin Clark. And what women's basketball has now evolved into, which is just utterly spectacular. Hey, listen, we hope you